A crime beyond time itself. Welcome to Fog Casebook. I am your host, Vaylor. Tell me where you're watching from. Your voices make this journey unforgettable. Now let's begin. The fog that November morning lay so thick upon Baker Street that the gas lamps burned with a sickly pallor, like watchful eyes made timorous by the gloom. From the street below came the soft clop of hooves, and the occasional rattle of a hansom shutters, as some impatient fare signalled his urgency. Within all was warm order, the violin upon its stand, the chemistry set glinting faintly where a stray beam of light caught glass, and my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes settled cross-legged upon the settee with the air of a solemn idol, a Persian slipper propped beside him, its tobacco sacrificed that the idol might think. Holmes scarcely glanced up as I entered with the morning's post. "A fresh tear in your left glove, Watson," he murmured. "Third finger. You have been in practice since daybreak, with a patient who demanded both haste and delicacy. I deduce a boy. Boys wriggle. Upon my word, Holmes," and I began, but his hand, thin and nervous, emerged from the folds of his dressing gown to take the letters, and a ghost of amusement flickered at the corners of his mouth. "Evidence, not flattery, my dear fellow," he said. "The faint trace of eucalyptus upon your cuff argues a vapour. The spot of iodine upon that same glove, carefully rubbed but not with a surgeon's thoroughness, suggests a wound dressed quickly. And the scuffing of mud upon your right boot is of a whitish clay streaked with ash. Mortimer Street after the sweepers have passed. There is only one household of your acquaintance there with a child in the grip of that irritating catarrh which fashionable nurseries call autumnal croup. I trust the little St. Aubin is easier." "He is," said I, surrendering as always to the inevitability of his triumph. "Though how you can name the street—" "By the mud, Watson. It has more character than most people." He riffled the post with a bored air, set aside a circular for Turkish baths with a disdainful gesture, and paused over a telegram. "Ha! The hand is not to my taste, but the content might be. Lestrade seeks our immediate presence at the yard, upon a most singular and confounding circumstance." He appends with more heat than grammar the phrase, "Time itself confounded. Bring your brain." "Time itself?" I repeated. "What on earth can that mean?" Holmes rose without further comment, his long arms unfolding like those of some mantis shaking itself free of reverie. In a moment he had the violin tucked safely away and was shrugging into his coat. "There is an odour of paradox in the air, Watson. I confess paradox is my preferred incense." We had barely reached the hat-stand when the rapid, wiry tread of a familiar foot halted upon our landing. Inspector Lestrade entered without ceremony, his keen ferret face more pinched than usual, his coat beaded with moisture from the fog. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said shortly. "I have been to the yard and back since sending that wire. And I'll wager my pension you will never have seen the like of this morning's business. If all London swore it, I should call it lying. But paper is less easily accused." Holmes inclined his head. "You set before me a contradiction, Inspector. I am all appetite. Pray warm yourself and state the facts." Lestrade remained standing, as if fearful that to sit would allow the thing to settle upon him like a cloak he could not shrug. At 7 o'clock a constable on the Marylebone beat, White, a reliable man, was summoned to the residence of Mr. Ernest Charpentier, partner in the firm of Charpentier and Wigram, bullion brokers to the Bank of England. Mr. Charpentier's housekeeper had gone to rouse him at 6:30, and found the gentleman dead in his study, the door bolted on the inside, the key upon the carpet just under the bookcase as if dropped from within, and the window latched. There's no mark of outward violence, but there's a bruise on the temple, and the doctor, one of your fellows, sir, says the heart stopped through shock or a blow. There is a clock upon the mantel of a French sort, which has been smashed. The hands are driven into the face at 17 minutes past 5. The housekeeper swears it was intact last night. "A locked room," murmured Holmes, though there was no relish in his tone. The phrase alone is often enough to render a lesser man theatrical. a broken clock indicating the moment. I begin to smell a novice at tragedy. You've not heard the rest, said Lestrade grimly. We have Mr. Charpentier's signature, neat as yours or mine, upon a receipt for 30,000 sovereigns drawn from the bank at 5:40 past 5 this morning. The cashier at the bank swears to the hand. The junior clerk swears he witnessed the receipt, and both men are sober churchmen with reputations to lose. The paper itself bears the bank's stamp. Remarkable, said Holmes. And more, Lestrade pressed on. At 6 and 10, according to a cabman whose license and honesty we have no cause to question, Mr. Charpentier was driven from the corner of Threadneedle Street to his residence in Marylebone. The cabman describes him exactly: height, whiskers, the scar at the corner of the mouth from a fencing accident 20 years ago, and notes his peculiar habit of rubbing the forefinger and thumb together as if counting something that is not there. He left the gentleman at his door, watched him ring, and drove on. Holmes clasped his hands behind him and regarded the fog-beaded window. So Mr. Charpentier dies, apparently at 17 minutes past 5, behind a door locked from the inside. And yet he draws a fortune at 5:45 and arrives home by hansom at 6:10 to die again. You are quite correct, Inspector. Time has been treated with a want of respect. Lestrade fished a folded sheet from his pocket and laid it upon our table. If your contempt for paradox needs feeding, here is the bank's receipt. I stepped over from the yard to fetch it myself. You'll observe the signature. I bent over the paper and started in spite of myself. It was not merely similar. It was so like as to be identical in the little peculiarities of Mr. Charpentier's hand, which I knew from public prospectuses and the subscription lists of various charities. The strong downward stroke of the sea, the way in which the pea's tail doubled back upon itself like a loop of rope, these things are the very fingerprints of a man's writing. Holmes glanced, nodded, and handed it back. Where is the body? At his house. We've sealed the study. Nothing touched. The doctor has done no more than ascertain death and the probability of a blow. Perhaps from a fall, perhaps from some instrument with a padded surface. There is a faint smell of something in the room, some perfume, the housekeeper says, though she cannot name it. No sign of the gold, mind you. If he drew 30,000 sovereigns, they did not come home with him. So, said Holmes softly, time steals a gentleman's life and gold in the same morning, and leaves behind a broken clock with a theatrical sense of irony. We must be moving, Watson. Take your bag. I fancy our French clock may be more instructive than the French doctor, whose ghost always lingers in such cases. Lestrade glanced between us with something of relief. You'll come, then. The chief was set to have me drag you by the collar if need be. I do not drag, Holmes replied with a wintry smile. I proceed. One moment. He had crossed to the mantel and was reaching for the violin before he seemed to think better of it. No. Music would impose an hypothesis too soon. Come. We took a cab, Lestrade on the step and Holmes within, his hat drawn low and his eyes half closed in that curious inward concentration, which I knew betokened not indolence but a sorting of probabilities, with the speed of the electric telegraph and the precision of a metronome. Watson, he said at last without lifting his lids, what is the minimum number of men required to be in two places at once? I laughed. One if he possesses a twin. Ah, said Holmes, but nature is not as obliging as sensation novelists. Failing a twin, a double must be manufactured. It is always easier to counterfeit time than features. The world believes what the clock tells it, until the clock is shown to be a liar. You suspect the broken clock was set wrong? I suspect the broken clock was smashed right, he returned. There is a world of difference. Lestrade, did the housemaid wind it nightly? She did, and says as much. Wound it last evening too at 9. Then if it reads 5:17 and is truly broken at that hour, we must ask whether the mainspring ran down at last, or whether a human hand preserved 17 minutes past 5 in amber. But before that, Tell me of Mr. Charpentier. Enemies? As few as a man in his trade can boast. He was charitable, regular, a church warden at St. Swithin's. A widower these 10 years. One daughter, Miss Eleanor Charpentier, 22, and a nephew in the firm, Mr. Basil Wigram, whose father died in the Indies. The housekeeper is a competent woman of long service. There is a valet, Deeks, who was with Mr. Charpentier abroad in his younger days, and has a soldier's smartness, and a scullery maid who knows nothing of anything. Miss Charpentier? Holmes asked, in great distress. She'd been visiting an aunt at Bayswater, and returned only when the police sent for her. Says her father had no nocturnal habits, kept to a strict schedule, and would have had no occasion to be at the bank so early unless called upon. Called upon by whom? Said Holmes, and the lid of one keen grey eye lifted. Ah, we arrive. The house in Marylebone wore its respectability like armour, clean brick, polished brass, curtains that admitted only an inoffensive quantity of light. Inside, Lestrade led us past a row of ancestral portraits whose mild eyes seemed ill-prepared for the morning's affront, and thence to a stout door upon the first-floor landing. He produced the key with a gesture of official satisfaction. We had to send a boy through the fanlight with a line to unbolt it, he said. Else we'd still be in the hall. The study within was the sort of room in which a careful man catalogues his life, a great mahogany desk, pigeonholes labelled with neat brass slips, a map of the empire with tiny flags pricked at Bombay, Cape Town and Adelaide, and centre stage upon the mantel, a French or Molu clock in ruins, its face starred, and its delicate hands thrust like spears at V&I. Mr. Ernest Charpentier lay upon the carpet a yard from the hearthrug, his fine features sunk, and the famous fencing scar livid against the pallor of his cheek. There was an odour in the air, faint and foreign, like an Eastern market remembered in winter. Holmes did not go to the body at once. He circled the room with his head tilted, an old hound reacquainting himself with the familiar scent. He paused at the window, ran his finger along the latch and sniffed it as if it might confess its sins. He crouched by the hearth and examined a crescent of soot upon the fender, then drew a magnifying lens from his pocket and considered what might have been no more than a chance mar upon the rug. "Watson," he said briskly, "your bag. I shall want the measure of that bruise and your opinion of its cause." Lestrade kindly refrained from stepping on the rug's pattern. "Those little diamonds will be more talkative if not trampled, and before we touch the deceased, let us attend to the living witness." "The living witness?" Lestrade echoed, surprised. Holmes tapped the clock's shattered face with the back of his knuckle, so lightly that it gave a minute, unhappy tick. "This," he said, "for all its French affectations, it is English in its habits. It was made to tell the truth. Someone taught it to lie. The question is, at whose behest?" He went suddenly very still, then leaned forward and inhaled over the mantel as a wine merchant might over a rare cask. "Yes," he murmured, and that one syllable contained interest, satisfaction, and the sharpening edge of a hunter's joy. "The perfume is not a woman's, it is a traveller's." "A traveller's?" I asked. The faintest touch of attar mingled with what a certain class of gentlemen fancy on the steamers to India, a concoction of bergamot and bay with a trace of quinine. "It clings to leather and money. It is not Charpentier's, it is our intruder's." Lestrade's eyebrows leapt. Then he was not alone at 517. Holmes's mouth curved. "On the contrary, Inspector, I believe Mr. Charpentier was very carefully accompanied, by his own timepiece and by a man who understood the worth of a minute better than most. Let us see whether time murdered our gentleman unaided, or whether murder merely bribed the clock." And with that, the investigation began. Lestrade's impatience beat a small tattoo upon the toe of his boot, while I knelt beside the body. The bruise at the right temple was oval, no more than 1.5 inches in its longest axis, with a faint paler crescent at one edge, such as is left when an object with a rim glances rather than strikes flush. There was no fracture that I could detect by gentle palpation, and the skin bore the faintest stippling, as if the blow had been delivered through cloth or from a padded object. The pupils were slightly unequal, the tongue unbitten. There was no froth at the lips. His hands were clean, the nails trimmed. Upon the left cuff I noted a brownish smear no larger than a pin's head, which I touched with my finger and brought to my nose. "Grease," I said. "Not candle, too rank." "Tallow mixed with graphite," Holmes supplied lightly from the mantel. "A lubricant. You will observe it again before the morning is out." I measured the bruise with my tape and gave my opinion. Her syncope following a concussion could account for the stop of the heart, but the blow alone is not of a severity to kill a strong man at once. A heavy fall against a rounded edge or a deliberate push might have done it. "Very good," said Holmes. "File the shape away, Watson. Our murderer has a fondness for ovals this morning." He had taken up the clock delicately, not to disturb the sprayed fragments, but to tilt it so that the light might search its wounded face. "Note, Inspector, the pattern of the glass. The starburst spreads chiefly downward and to the right. The hands are driven at 5 and 17, but the force has come not straight on from a fall, but from a knuckles jab against the minute hand where it meets the arbor. A child could do it with a thimble and mischief in his heart. See also the dust line on the mantel, how the clock has been shifted by a finger's breadth of late. Someone turned it, then drove the hand, then dashed it down to complete the picture. The lie was dressed like the truth." Lestrade grunted. "And the time?" "Preserved," said Holmes with a small satisfied nod. "Now if the lie was made, it must be because the truth was inconvenient. We shall take the truth from those who cannot conspire. Scents, scratches, ashes, and rugs." He crouched over the fender where a crescent of soot marred the bright metal. "Our man knelt here. His knee has printed its arc upon the soot, and leaned in to reach the clock. He is not tall, else he need not kneel. His cloth is coarse enough to lift soot, but leave some behind. Observe the drag of black along the rug at the very point where, if you please, Inspector, you were about to set your foot." Lestrade jerked back, and Holmes smiled without mirth. "You see the advantage of diamonds that do not lie when pressed. The path begins at the door and comes to the hearth and returns, no other tracks crossing. It is the same shoe out and back. Now how does a man enter a bolted door and leave it bolted? That is the conjurer's patter. Here is the conjurer's thread. He went to the key upon the carpet and did not touch it. Instead he brought his lens to bear and then his nose, like a hound confirming his first impression. A whisper of machine oil mixed with tallow, and a smear upon the very lip of the keyhole. Watson's cuff was its kinsman. Lestrade, oblige me by sending one of your men for a straight length of whalebone if he can get it from a staymaker in the High Street, and a skein of black silk. Failing that, a violin string will do. I shall try a little conjuring for you after breakfast." "Breakfast?" cried Lestrade. "You mean to eat with the thing the way it is?" "My dear Inspector," Holmes returned, "I play better when tuned. Meanwhile, let us learn who wears the traveller's perfume." He rang. The housekeeper, Mrs. Darnell, presented herself with the grave air of one long accustomed to a gentleman's rhythms, and determined to maintain them even under assault. She told her story plainly, how she had gone in at 9 the previous evening with a tray, and found Mr. Charpentier writing. How he had dismissed her, saying he should sit up an hour. How she had heard no bell thereafter, and upon finding his room unslept at 6:30, had gone to the study and discovered the door fast and the silence terrible. "Was your master in the habit of wearing scent?" Holmes asked abruptly. "Never, sir. He said such things were for the young and the idle. And among the household, who favours the East?" Holmes's nostrils quivered almost imperceptibly. "Bergamot and bay with a hint of something from the Indies." Mrs. Darnell's forehead puckered. "Why, none, sir. Unless Mr. Deeks, perhaps. He returned in the spring from the Cape with Mr. Charpentier, when they had been to see a mine, and he keeps his uniforms very neat with some oil he got from a sailor. He says it keeps the damp out. Mr. Deeks attends his master's clothing?" "Yes, sir, and his guns and his fencing foils. He takes pride in them." "Send him up," said Holmes, And Miss Charpentier, if she is equal to the interview." The valet came first, a compact man of 45 with the straight back and impassive eye of the old soldier. His boots were clean but bore a faint freckling upon the instep, like black pepper. Holmes's glance flicked to them and away like a kingfisher. The man answered respectfully and without embroidery. He had last seen his master at 10, had retired, had heard nothing. No, he wore no scent. He disliked the stuff. He did use an oil upon hinges and locks, supplied by a friend from the docks. He kept a little of it in a leather screw-cap bottle in the pantry. "Show me your hands," Holmes said. They were clean, the palms thickened by older work. Yet along the side of the left forefinger was a narrow dark shine such as I have seen left by the regular drawing of silk across the skin. "You play an instrument, Mr. Deeks?" "No, sir." "A bowline, then, or a whip, no matter. Pray do not leave the house." Miss Eleanor Charpentier entered upon that, pale but composed, with a courage that made, I confess, a very favourable impression upon me. Her mourning was hasty but tasteful. Her eyes were reddened yet steady. She confirmed what we had heard and supplied this. Her father had told her at dinner that certain foreign remittances had arrived unexpectedly, and that he might be required very early by the bank. "He disliked it," she said in a low voice. "He thought the hour ungentlemanly and made for rogues. Did he name the correspondent?" "No, sir. Only that it was connected to Adelaide." Holmes's eyes went to the map upon the wall where a tiny flag pricked that very name. "Your father's habit of rubbing the forefinger and thumb together. Did you ever remark it?" She coloured faintly. "Only when he was troubled, Mr. Holmes. It began after the mine in the Cape proved ill-starred. He would do it when figures occupied him." "Figures occupied him this morning," said Holmes. "Thank you, Miss Charpentier. Your testimony is of the greatest value. One more question. Did your cousin, Mr. Basil Wigram, call last night?" Her lashes trembled. "He came at 8, stayed half an hour, and left. They spoke in the study. I did not hear words, but the tone was serious." "Good. Pray forgive us our intrusion. We shall not distress you without cause." When she had gone, Lestrade burst out, "Wigram, then?" "The nephew, the partner, the arguments. Why, it is as near as needs." "And therefore," Holmes said gently, "most likely false. Let us not leap where we must tread. Inspector, you will examine the pantry for a leather bottle of oil. If it smells like our clock's confession, you will bring it to me. Watson, the boots." I bent over Deeks's boots where they had stood neatly by the door. The pepper upon the instep was under the glass, not pepper but glitter. Minute flakes with a yellowish tinge. I touched one. "It smudged to a dull grey, mica," I ventured. "Or some flaked mineral." "Gold's shy cousin," Holmes murmured. "Tailings from a battery stamp, perhaps, or the dust that clings to bags of coin carried carelessly. Our valet has walked in places where money is ground to powder." Lestrade returned with the bottle and a face of triumph. "The very same reek, Mr. Holmes, and there's silk in the drawer by it and a fishbone needle stiff as a reed." "He's your conjurer." "Perhaps," said Holmes. He took the little bottle, tipped it so that a single dark bead oozed to the lip and let it fall upon the key. The bead gathered like a new pupil in an old eye. Perhaps not. A servant learns tricks by being told to fetch. A master invents them. We shall try our thread upon the bolt after we have breakfasted and paid a visit to Threadneedle Street. If the bank's clock tells truth where this one lies, we shall know which way time was driven this morning." He turned once more to the body, and for a moment I saw upon his face that remote expression he wears when his mind outruns the room. 5:17 is a story, Watson. 6:10 is an alibi. Between them lies the only hour that ever murders, the hour when a man chooses. Let us go and see who in this house and at the bank chose for Mr. Ernest Charpentier. We took bread and coffee in the dining room at Holmes's insistence, for he holds that a brain which denies the body, its ration soon feeds upon itself. During that brief interval, a constable procured the whalebone and silk, and when we returned to the landing, Holmes's eyes had that fine brightness I associate with both hunger satisfied and a problem that has condescended to become soluble. Observe." "Watson," said he, taking his place outside the study door. He produced from his pocket the little screw-cap bottle Lestrade had brought and touched the lip of the keyhole with the smallest smear. "Oil reduces the complaint of ill-kept iron. Now the bolt which is within has a knob with a small aperture. Our friend's tallow served two purposes, to quiet and to grip. We shall employ only the second." He fed the black silk through the keyhole upon the end of the whalebone, guiding by delicate taps that sounded to me no louder than the ticking of a mantelpiece clock. Presently he withdrew the whalebone, and I saw that the silk had made a loop within. "A little patience," he murmured, manipulating the string with the touch of a conjurer. "Yes, there it is." We lasso the knob, pull no gently, and so there came the softest click from the other side. Holmes opened the door with a flourish and stood aside like a maître d'hôtel. Lestrade whistled. "By the Lord!" "By the silk," Holmes corrected, smiling. "Your whalebone will be found in many a respectable lady's closet. It is not witchcraft. It is practice." Our man had more of that than most. Lestrade's face darkened. "Deeks, the thread on his finger, you saw it." "I saw that he knows how friction polishes flesh," said Holmes. "I did not see him at the bank at 5:45, nor in a hansom at 10 past. Let us go where the lie was first dignified by a stamp." He looked once more around the room. "Leave all as it is, Inspector. When truth begins to speak, it resents having its sentences rearranged. We found Threadneedle Street rising from the fog like a cliff of stone. The sentries of commerce set at their posts, and none of them, I fancy, caring a fig for the drama that had played itself across their very threshold. The bank's chief cashier, Mr. Clegg, a gentleman of clerical neatness and that particular reserve, which leads a man to recount facts as if confessing sins, met us with his junior, a pink-eared youth named Pritchard, whose earnestness set even Lestrade at ease. "You have our receipt?" Holmes asked without preamble. "We do, Mr. Holmes," said Clegg, and laid it before him in a tray as if it were sacramental bread. Holmes did not touch it. "The time?" 5:45. "I keep my watch to the observatory." "And who admitted Mr. Charpentier before the banking hour?" "No special arrangement," Clegg replied with the faintest wince. "Mr. Charpentier's firm have on rare occasions required an early draught. We open the bullion door at the alley on such days." He gestured to a heavy side entrance. "A porter is present." "I am called." "The junior clerk attends. It is all quite regular, sir." "Quite," said Holmes. "Your porter today?" "Mr. Cribb, 30 years in service." Holmes's glance flicked to the junior. "Mr. Pritchard, your handwriting?" The youth coloured. "I entered the ledger and witnessed the signature." "Sir, Mr. Charpentier's hand is well known to us." Holmes strolled past the tray to the high desk where a blotter, sandy with drying dust, lay beside the great ledger. "You preserve your blotting sheets?" "Until the book is balanced," said Clegg, though I sensed he disliked the question. "There is the morning sheet." Holmes lifted it by a corner and held it to the light. Even I, no expert, could see a ghost. The reversed lines of a neat signature repeated twice, once firm and once faint, as if the pen had been tested upon a scrap before committing to the paper. "A tidy man," he observed, "and economical. He rehearses only once." He set the sheet down and, with a glance to Clegg for permission, leaned over the ledger. "You spell the hour?" "We put the watch time in the margin," Pritchard said eagerly, pointing. "Here, 5:45, Mr. Clegg's own hand." Holmes's gaze slid from the figures to the sand upon the blotter. He pinched a grain, rolled it, and sniffed it. An absurd action, one would have thought, had I not observed him read murders in ashes. He smiled slightly and wiped his finger in my handkerchief. "You mix pumice with your sand?" "A little," Clegg admitted. "The air is damp of a morning." "Your pen tray," said Holmes. "Might I?" Clegg yielded it with a reluctance not of guilt, but of temperament. Holmes examined the nibs one by one, paused at 2 and laid them apart. "This has been cut new today, mark the bright shoulder. This other has a whisper of fibre at the split. Twill or cambric I cannot say. Was Mr. Charpentier gloved? Gloved? Clegg looked surprised. No, sir. He removed them. I remember distinctly, for he placed them upon the ledge and then rubbed his fingers together in that little way of his. He counted something in the air. I have seen him do it when his mind was busy. Holmes's eyes gleamed. And what did he withdraw, Mr. Clegg? 30,000 sovereigns would be a heavy customer for even your stoutest bags. We made it notes, sir, Clegg returned, a trifle stiffly. No man carries that weight in gold without fanfare. 15 packets of Bank of England notes sealed and initialed, 10s and 50s. Mr. Pritchard brought them from the safe. Holmes bowed. Your prudence does you credit. The packets? Delivered to Mr. Charpentier in a leather case he brought for the purpose. He signed, I countersigned. Mr. Pritchard witnessed. The porter saw him depart. Holmes turned to the junior. Describe Mr. Charpentier. The very image one sees in the illustrated sheets, Pritchard declared. Close-trimmed whiskers, a white scar at the corner of the mouth, a pearl tie-pin with a flaw like a little crescent, and a manner, if you will pardon me, that seemed preoccupied. His scent? Holmes asked carelessly. Pritchard blinked. Scent, sir? Never mind, Mr. Clegg, your porter. Crib, when fetched, proved a granite of a man with small, shrewd eyes. He corroborated the tale in few words. Knew the gent, he said. Carried himself like he owned what he touched. That case he had, brown leather, old and supple. Smelt like a sailor's chest. Tar? Said Holmes gently. And a bit of spice, Crib allowed. He was in and out in 5 minutes. Walked towards Cornhill. Cab took him. A brown leather case, Holmes repeated. Old, supple, spiced. He looked as if some far bell had chimed for him. And the cab? Number taken, said Lestrade briskly. Already traced to Jarvis of Poplar. He stands by his statement. The gentleman gave Marylebone and sat back quiet, rubbing those fingers together all the way. Holmes bowed to our hosts with that peculiar mixture of gratitude and abstraction which leaves a man both flattered and a little chilled. In the street he hailed a cab and directed the driver to Poplar. As we rattled eastward, his silence lengthened until I could bear it no longer. You have something, Holmes. I have the outline of something, he said. We are asked to accept that a dead man signed a paper, carried 15 sealed packets, and rode home to die again. If we were fools, we should ask which of those 3 is impossible. As we are not, we ask instead, which can be most easily imitated? The signature, I ventured. But Clegg swore to a hand. I do not impugn it. Yet signatures can be rehearsed. The blotter tells us so. More the case, old, supple, and seasoned, belongs not to a gentleman who buys his leather in Bond Street, but to a traveller who oils against damp and spices against rot. Our scent at the study, our mica on Deeks's boot, our oil at the keyhole. Watson, they make a harmony. You suspect Deeks, then? I suspect a school of fish, he answered dryly. It is seldom the minnow sets the net. Consider, a leather case that remembers voyages, a bank clerk who witnesses what he believes, a porter who knows faces but not souls, and a cabman who sees what a scar and a whisker bid him. Add to it a clock whose truth is murdered to give birth to a time. No, do not answer. Let us listen to Jarvis first. He has seen the ghost that rode in his cab. Jarvis of Poplar received us in a yard that smelt of horse and wet canvas. He was a broad-shouldered fellow with a face like a friendly mastiff and a manner made deferential by Lestrade's presence. Yes, he had taken up a gentleman on Threadneedle Street at about 6:10, neat as a pin, scar and all, with a brown case. A quiet un, said Jarvis. Said nothing but the address. His hands. Holmes asked. Gloves, Jarvis said promptly. Good kid gloves, but shiny at the tips. Weren't so when he got in. Shiny, I echoed. From counting, like, Jarvis explained. Rubbing the finger and thumb, making the leather slick. I've seen clerks do it come payday. Holmes's eyes brightened as if a lantern had caught a hidden facet. Thank you, Jarvis. You have been invaluable. One more thing. When he alighted, did you see him ring?" "I did, sir," said Jarvis. "Rang and stepped back like a gent." "And you drove off before the door opened?" "Aye, he had the look of a gentleman to whom doors open." Holmes nodded, and as we left the yard he gave a small, contented sigh. "We shall go back to Marylebone," he said. "It is time we asked Mr. Deeks whether he has lately purchased kid gloves one size too tight, and whether he can tell Adelaide from Bombay in the dark." I mean, Holmes replied, "that if a hand may be forged, so may a face. But there is one thing which is always clumsily imitated and never suspected." "What is that?" "The habits of a man's skin." He tapped his own forefinger and thumb. "Leather takes a polish where flesh does not. Our counterfeit charpentier polished his mistake all the way home. Deeks received us in the morning-room, with the composure of a man who has marched beneath hotter suns than ours. His respectful gravity did not desert him, yet I thought there was a shade too much of it, like polish applied twice to the same boot. Miss Charpentier was mercifully absent. Mrs. Darnell hovered and then withdrew at Holmes's glance. "My condolences." "Sir," Deeks began, but Holmes cut him gently. "You are a handy fellow, Mr. Deeks. A soldier's fingers turn to any service. They oil hinges and cut nibs. They dress foils and, when necessary, handle silk." The valet's eyes did not flicker. "I do what I'm bid, Mr. Holmes." "Excellent," Holmes returned. "Then you will oblige me in a trifle. The study door is, I believe, now unbolted. We shall go into the hall. Imagine that the bolt is shot within, and that you stand without, with only what a careful servant might keep at hand of a night. Oil, thread, a length of fish bone from the kitchen. Show Inspector Lestrade the parlour trick the world calls impossible." Lestrade's eyebrows sprang. "You mean to save time," Holmes said. "Come." On the landing he delivered to Deeks the very instruments he himself had used. The valet balanced them in his palm as a billiard player weighs a cue. He knelt, applied a whisper of oil to the keyhole, and began with deft assurance to feed the bone and silk. There was no fumbling. His hands moved with the economy of long practice. The loop caught, tightened, breathed. A moment later, the bolt within slid back with that same discreet click which had startled me before. Deeks rose expressionless. "Thank you," said Holmes. "You have served your master admirably before and after." "Another trifle, and I have done. Your right-hand glove," a pause. Then Deeks drew from his pocket a pair of tan kid gloves, such as one buys in Oxford Street. The fingers slightly wrinkled, and, when Holmes lifted them by the tips, dully burnished at thumb and forefinger. "Shiny," murmured Holmes, "and rank with tallow. A man who rubs his naked fingers together leaves no luster. Leather betrays what flesh denies. Whose habit did you imitate last night?" Deeks's lips pressed into a line. "I wore them against the damp," he said at last. "I have a touch of rheumatism." "From the Cape?" Holmes asked, idly sniffing the glove. "Or from Adelaide?" The man's gaze shifted the merest fraction. It was enough. "Bombay," he said. Holmes's eyes brightened. "Thank you. You have told me you were not in the study at 10 to 6, because had you been, your nose would know the difference between the steamer to India and the mail boat to South Australia. The perfume that clung to the clock is not Jara and quinine, but sandal and bay, and the leather case that carried notes across Threadneedle Street was salted, not with tar, but with the spice men use against mildew on long, dry voyages. A Cape man knows oil and dust. An Adelaide man knows mutton bird grease and cloves." He flicked the glove back. "You had a teacher, Mr. Deeks. We shall meet him presently." Lestrade struck in, impatient. "We have enough for the bracelets." "He admits the bolt." Holmes lifted a hand. "He admits skill, not guilt. Arrest him now when you frighten the fish from the net's mouth." "No, Inspector. We shall keep Mr. Deeks where he is most useful, under his own roof." "If you think I'll run—" Deeks began with dignity wounded. Holmes's smile was thin. "You will not. Your boots have been to places your mistress has never seen, Mr. Deeks. There is mica upon them, and a glitter in your pantry that does not come from Mrs. Darnell's polish. When a man has gold dust in the creases of his leather, he does not scuttle. He waits for the man who brings him orders. We returned to the study. Holmes went to the hearth as a musician returns to his theme. With the tip of his cane he touched the coal scuttle, then stooped and reached within the brass lip. His hand emerged with a flat oval of darkened wax, no bigger than a shilling, upon which a crescent line had been incised with extraordinary precision. "Watson," he said quietly, placing it in my palm. "Our fencing scar in negative. Warm this against the cheek and dust with powder, and even Jarvis of Poplar, God bless his honest eyes, will swear that Mr. Charpentier has taken his seat. Observe the grain from a biscuit of sealing wax and the smear of gum. Our counterfeit wore whiskers in truth, but not the scar." Lestrade uttered an exclamation that was half an oath and half unwilling admiration, disguised, of course. "And the tie-pin?" Holmes moved to the desk, opened a small drawer with a penknife rather than risk disturbing the dead man's keys, and drew out a morocco case. Within lay a pearl pin delicately flawed, its crescent on the right. He set it beside a twin which he produced from his pocket-book. The faintest scratch upon the mount betrayed it. "I took this from the carpet near the hearth," he said. "You will note that its crescent is on the left, a mirror mistake. Our visitor dressed with care, but in a poor light." "You mean to say the man at the bank," I began. "Was a careful composite," Holmes finished. "He had the whiskers, the height, the habit of the hands learned and rehearsed, the pin inverted by some clumsy rogue who assumed that a flaw repeats as a reflection, the scar fashioned from wax, the leather case that smelt of voyages, and kid gloves to polish his counterfeit. He signed, having practised upon the blotter, took 15 packets and rode to Marylebone to purchase, with a ring at a dead man's bell, the time in which his confederate made a clock lie. Before Lestrade could reply, a rapid step sounded in the passage, and a constable thrust in his head, cap in hand. "Beg pardon, sir. Message from the yard. A money changer in Wapping has brought in a packet of Bank of England notes, one of those missing, found in a sailor's lodging-house near the stairs. The man who left it bolted, name given as Reeves, scar at the mouth, sir." Holmes's eyes kindled. "Stakes rise, Inspector. When money comes to ground, it leaves a print deeper than any foot." He turned to Deeks. "You know Wapping, Mr. Deeks." The valet's face remained a mask. "Any man who has shipped knows it." "Just so. Then you also know a barber's shop by the river, where a man may purchase whiskers by the ounce and a scar by the stroke of a penknife." Holmes's voice softened, and there was in it that strange pity he sometimes reserves for the competent rogue. "You have been used. You have the trick of the bolt and the bottle of oil. You have a conscience that obeys, and you have boots which go where told. But the mind is elsewhere." Lestrade had already snatched his hat. "We'll run this Reeves to earth within the hour." "You will try," Holmes said. "But take care. If Reeves is the man I think, he will not keep the notes near his person. He will have sunk them among things that resemble them." "Among what?" "I asked paper," said Holmes simply. "Bales of it. A warehouse, a printer's, a ship's manifest room. Better still, among rags for the vat. A packet amid 100 similar is a mouse in a cheesemonger's shop." He moved to the map and tapped, not at Adelaide now, but at a tiny pin that pricked the docks. "There is a paper merchant in Wapping whose yard opens on the stairs. If I were a traveller with a spice-scented case, a waxen scar and 15 burdensome packets, I should sell one to a fool to establish the scent, and bury the rest where honest men shovel by the ton." Lestrade hesitated, torn between skepticism and the uncomfortable memory that Holmes's most outlandish conjectures too often ripened into fact. "Very well," he said curtly. "I'll send men to the paper yard and to every second-hand shop along the lane. He jabbed a finger at Deeks. "You stay." Deeks inclined his head. "I am at Miss Eleanor's service." "See that you are," Holmes murmured. He took up his hat and cane. "Come, Watson. We shall visit Wapping by the shortest road, the one in a man's head. If Reeves be the sort of craftsman I believe, He will have left not only money but a pattern, and patterns, like clocks, dislike lying when the proper hand sets them right. In the handsome Holmes sat very straight, his face animated by that peculiar controlled excitement, which to me is more terrifying than any flare of passion. "We have passed the first veil," he said at last. "We know now that time was forged to corroborate a counterfeit face. The next step is to ask who profited by that hour between 5 and 6, who entered by silk and left by silence. If Wapping gives up one packet, it will point to the man who thought to hide the rest from arithmetic." He touched my sleeve. "Keep your eyes for mica, your nose for spice, and your fingers for paper that has been too recently born. Our murderer has taught his clock to lie. Let us see whether he is as successful with pulp." The river, when we came to it, was a sluggish slate under a sky the colour of old pewter. Wapping High Street wore its usual jumble of commerce and decay. Chandler's shops with windows greasy from 100 years of lamp oil, marine stores frothing rope like seaweed, and, here and there, the gaping teeth of a yard where bales of rags and barrels of pulp were stacked like an improvised fortress against the tide. The money changers was a narrow den with iron bars before the panes, and a bell that jangled like a goat when we entered. Lestrade had preceded us by a minute, and stood now at the counter confronting a man whose long, clever fingers made a show of innocence, even while his eyes calculated it. "This is Mr. Mordell," said Lestrade. "He brought in the packet." "Brought to me, rather," corrected the man with a cringing smile. "Left by a lodger, sir. I am a lawful conduit only. It is my duty to the realm, aye to decency, to report what smells wrong." Holmes's glance rested upon him, as one might rest a lens upon a specimen. "Your duty sits lightly, Mr. Mordell. It rises when profit falls. The packet lay under glass. It was one of those dull brown paper parcels, which the bank prepares with a neatness that would have satisfied even Mr. Clegg, a strip of gummed paper, initialed in a clerk's tidy hand, the tally and pencil upon one corner, and within, notes pressed flat by a disciplined book's worth of custom. Holmes did not reach for it. He drew instead his lens and studied the gummed seam where a razor might kiss. "Permitted?" he asked, and at Lestrade's nod, he took the tiniest pocket-knife and lifted a fraction of the paper, where some clumsy soul had already essayed the trick. "Ah," he murmured, so softly that even I barely heard. He sniffed, touched the pad of his finger to the glue, and tasted it with that fastidious rapidity which in any other man would have been grotesque. Gum arabic darkened with a trace of clove. "Not bank issue. The seal was tampered with?" Lestrade demanded. "Lifted and reseated," Holmes returned, "by fingers that knew the habit, but not the recipe. Mr. Clegg's assistant uses pumice on a damp morning. The man who opened this uses spice to soften old gum. He is a traveller or the pupil of one." Mordell bleated protest, then yielded up his tale. "The sailor," he said, name given as Reeves, had sent the packet by a ragged boy with promise of a share if exchanged without questions. Mordell, polishing his virtue and his shop sign in one motion, had taken the thing to the police. "A foolish sailor, sir," he concluded, "or a generous one." "Foolish," Holmes said, "but not a sailor. A sailor ties knots. The twine here is clerk's work. Square and flat, not the bite of a reef knot. Reeves, then, is either a liar by trade, or one who hires liars." "The lodging?" Mordell gestured. "Up Anchor Lane, third door. He was gone when your men arrived. We found the lodging-house by its smell before we spotted its sign, a sour compound of wet wood, frying fat, and lives worn to rags. The proprietress, an apron-swaddled woman with a voice sharp enough to peel potatoes, confirmed that Reeves had kept a room for a week and paid in advance. Quiet he was, she said, and particular. Scraped his chin with a foreign soap that smelt like a church. Left at dawn with a bag. I missed him when I woke. Holmes stood in the mean little chamber and breathed once as a hound might mouth the wind. He did not go to the trunk, but to the washstand, where a sliver of soft soap in a chipped dish betrayed a delicate scent. "Sandal again," he said. And here, Watson." He pointed to the glass, its frame nicked with tiny cuts where a man, improving his disguise by lamplight, had trimmed hair to length. "Horsehair and human whisker both. Our barber at the stairs is industrious." He stooped and, with a folded card, teased from the floor beside the bed a thread of black silk no longer than a thumbnail. He regarded it, then tucked it away. I could see from the angle of his head that some inward chime had sounded, but he said nothing of it. Instead, he crossed to the hearth and took from the ashes the ghost of a label. It was charred almost to illegibility, but upon it one could still make out in smeared, respectable type, Bell & Coeus's paper factors, St. Ayres. "Belter," Holmes said, reading what the fire had not quite devoured. "Belter and Coburnder's paper factors, St. Catherine's Stairs. Lestrade, pray tell me you posted a man there." "2," Lestrade snapped. "And 3 at the Lane. Then let us see how deep paper may bury money. Belter's yard was a canyon of bales, old linen, sailors' canvas, mill ends from printers, and the drifts of lint that hang in such places like a domestic snowfall. Men moved among them with hooks, and a clerk with a ledger like a family Bible checked loads as they arrived. The foreman, a slab-faced fellow with the suspicious courtesy of a man who has learned that the law takes an interest where profit is too suddenly lively, met us with the habitual protestations. No, he had seen no packets, though he admitted no lodgers to his shed. Yes, sometimes gentlemen sent waste paper to be pulped. Holmes lifted a bail corner and pinched the fringe. "Rag with a soul of print," he mused. "You buy from newspapers?" "Some," the foreman allowed. "And banks when they clear their drawers." "Not the Bank of England," Holmes said. "Their waste is too jealous to come so far." He straightened, and his eyes were on the ledger, not the bales. "May I?" The clerk hesitated, then, cowed by Lestrade's card, pushed it over. Holmes turned the leaves with that swift, unerring touch I have seen him use upon music. His finger paused, returned, and rested an instant. He looked up. "You took in a private cart at 7 this morning." "2," said the clerk reluctantly. "1 from a solicitor's in Holborn, 1 from a printer's in Houndsditch, and both entered in the same hand," Holmes said absently, "though your assistant stands before me with his pen unmended and a blot upon his cuff, curious." His gaze swept the yard. It settled at last upon a stack of paper bales bound with twine that glared pale against the damp wood. He crossed, knelt, and laid his ear against the woven mass as if it might whisper. Then, with the same pocket-knife he had used upon the packet, he slipped 2 cords and opened the bale like a surgeon. Within, the compressed rags sprang outward with a weary sigh. Holmes's hands moved among them with discriminating certainty, not rummaging but choosing, as if the bale had confessed a secret language to him. He drew forth a sheaf of paper, upon which a faint dye like the breath of blue lingered. He shook it once. A sealed packet, twin to Mordell's, fell to the ground. Lestrade made a sound that might have been triumph. "By heaven," Holmes's palm restrained him. "Gently. The mouse is not yet at cheese." He held the packet up, turned it so that the tally lay towards the light, and smiled, not broadly, but with that inward curve which to me is always the sign that a detail has slipped into place upon some hidden thread. "Watson," he said, "what do you see?" "A bank packet," I answered stupidly. "Initialed and numbered," Holmes added. "Numbered in a hand that knows its own flourish. Clegg's hand makes a loop like a fish's eye where others make a needle. Here is the fish, and yet—" He touched the corner. "Here is another's bait." "What bait?" Lestrade demanded. Holmes folded the packet and slipped it, unread, into his pocket. "The sort that catches the clever. Inspector, your men will turn this yard to matchwood and find 3 more, no fewer. Belter's ledger will yield a load taken in at 7 and delivered to the vat by 8, and if you pull the plug before noon, you may yet save the paper that would have become the confessional of our conspirator. But do not look for Reeves among the bales. He is already windward." "Then what have we gained?" Lestrade cried. "A pattern," Holmes replied. "We have learned that a man who feigns a sailor sells 1 packet to light a trail, hides 4 to mislead the dog, and feeds the rest to the mill that wipes names clean. That is not the economy of a valet. It is the arithmetic of a partner, I started. Wigram. Holmes's face did not change. Only his eyes flickered with that quick brilliance which tells me he has leapt a gap we others cannot yet see. The nephew was here last night. The uncle was dead by morning. The bank's door opened to a face made in pieces, and a time forged by silk. And money that should have paid Adelaide went to water. These are facts. Whether they name Mr. Wigram or only the shadow of his acquaintance, I do not say. He moved as if idly to a heap of twine cuttings and lifted a coil between finger and thumb. It was black silk flattened by constant pressure, with a curious twist in its lay. He rubbed it once against his sleeve, and when it caught the light I saw, to my surprise, a minute dusting of those pale, glittering motes we had first noticed upon Deeks's boot. Mica again, I said. And something else, Holmes returned, bringing the coil close. A whisper of graphite. Our friend oils his locks and powders his thread. He abhors squeaks. Mr. Deeks abhors them also, but his thread has the cape's rough twist, not this long. Even lay that comes from a manufacturer who sells to drapers off Cheapside. He dropped the coil as one would have thought too ripe to air. Enough! Lestrade, recovering his practical zeal, gave a fusillade of orders. Men went to and fro with hooks and handcarts. The foreman swore piously and then cooperated. In the midst of it, Holmes stood quite still, listening. Not to the noise, I think, but to the argument of details arrayed now in his mind, like the pieces upon his chessboard. At last he touched my sleeve. "Back to Marylebone," he said softly. "There is a question I failed to put to Miss Charpentier, and it must be asked before the tide of events washes her into some inlet where even truth grows brackish. Lestrade," he raised his voice without turning, "if your men recover 3 packets, send them to the yard. If they recover 4, send for me. 4 means our adversary is tidier than I take him for, and I should like to shake his hand." "In cuffs," Lestrade muttered. In admiration of his method, Holmes corrected, and his lip curved. "Come, Watson. The clock has told one lie. Let us see whether a lady's memory will tell us another, or a truth she does not know. Holmes, we found Miss Charpentier in the small morning room whose windows looked upon a strip of garden where the fog lay like a grey shawl dropped by an elderly aunt. She rose at once with that quiet courage which had impressed me before, but I could see that the strain had hollowed her eyes and made the corner of her mouth a little tremulous. Holmes bowed with unusual gentleness. "1 question only, mademoiselle," he said. 2, perhaps. "But the second will answer itself, if the first is happily resolved. Your father possessed or did not possess a brown leather case, old supple, and of the sort a traveller affects. Has such a thing a place in this house?" She frowned in thought. There was a case that belonged to my mother's brother, Captain Lyle. He left it with us when he sailed his last voyage. It is kept, I think, in the press upon the upper landing with some of our old trunks." She coloured faintly, as if to excuse the disorder of a household caught unawares. "Mr. Deeks attends to those things. Would you be so very good," Holmes said, "as to permit me to glance at it?" She rang. Deeks appeared self-contained as ever, but I fancied that something watchful glimmered in the quiet of his eye. "Mr. Deeks," said Miss Charpentier, "the captain's leather case in the landing press. Bring it down, if you please." For the first time the valet's composure was visibly pricked. "Miss Eleanor, pardon. If you refer to the old brown case with a brass clasp, I regret to say it is not there. I sought it some days ago to clean the mould from the leather, and I could not lay my hand upon it." Holmes looked mildly interested. "Some days ago? How many?" "4, sir." "And the last you remember of it?" "In the press, sir, when I overhauled the linen a month since." Holmes's gaze travelled to the stair. "The press, then, if you please. I will not trouble you for more than a moment." We followed him to the landing, where Deeks opened the cupboard door upon a smell of camphor and disuse. The trunks nested like ungainly turtles. Holmes mounted upon the lower step and peered within, then took from his pocket that little lens I have seen him employ upon a sheet of paper with as much effect as a magistrate obtains with a bench of law. He touched the inner shelf with a finger and held it up. A smear of pale dust lay upon the nail. Embedded in it, like an insect in amber, glinted a particle too bright for that dim eyrie. "Mica," said he softly, and smiled without mirth. The case stood here. It was removed by hands that had lately been among the tailings of some industrious battery. "You see, Watson, the dust has taken the impression of a long, flat strap. It left in its groove a sparkle." He closed the door, and to Miss Charpentier, who had watched this with a mixture of bewilderment and faith, he said very quietly, "Your father was sent for early this morning by a message, perhaps last night by one earlier. Do you possess such a note?" She started. "Yes, how did you—" "It lies on the escritoire." We returned to the morning room. She opened a small drawer and gave Holmes a telegram. It was of that common sort one sees any day in the hand of a maid. Blue paper, the thin ribbon of the wire's receipt pasted neatly along the top. Holmes did not read the words first. He lifted the ribbon, sniffed, and pressed with a fingernail the edge where the paste had dried. "Clove," he murmured. "Again clove. And the cutting, see, Watson, how the message strip has been trimmed a trifle ragged at the right. The yard's forms are guillotined. A printer's hand in Houndsditch is more rustic." He read aloud, not unmusically, "Request Mr. Charpentier attend Bank 545 on urgent matter re-Adelaide remittance. Clegg." He turned the paper, and with that pointed forefinger traced a tiny blind stamp at the corner, letters faint as watermarks. K & Son, Houndsditch. Mr. Clegg writes upon the bank's forms and signs in full. He does not buy his stationery among the rag merchants. Your father was summoned, Miss Charpentier, by a very present liar." She sank into the chair as if a string had been cut, though she mastered herself bravely. Then he went into a trap. Mr. Holmes, who would do such a thing to him? He was kind, he was strict, but he would not harm. Holmes's hand rose, fingers slightly outspread in that calming gesture I have seen quiet the agitated and the guilty alike. "We shall not wrong your father by guesses. We have the hand. The arm will follow. Tell me, your father spoke last night of Adelaide. Was the name given him of a person? A firm, a ship?" She hesitated, knitting her brows. "Only that Mr. Pelling would be satisfied if the remittance were made before noon." "Mr. Pelling?" I repeated. "Aubrey Pelling, sir," she said. "Agent for the Southern Cross, and for certain mines near Adelaide. He called yesterday and stayed no more than 10 minutes. It was after he left that my father told me he might be called early." Holmes's eyes, for all the world, appeared to darken, as if the pupils had dilated to admit an inward picture. "Pelling," he said. "A man of 35, smooth-shaven, with a trifle of pomade too oriental for a British taste, sandalwood to disguise the bay." She looked astonished. "You know him?" "I know his tribe," Holmes replied. "His card?" She produced it. Holmes held it scarcely an instant before slipping it into his pocketbook. "Thank you. You will do nothing, absolutely nothing, without sending first to me. Mr. Deeks, you will admit no one save Inspector Lestrade or myself." It was on that word that fate, which loves dramatic timing less than playwrights suppose, but is not above granting them a cue, contrived the interruption. Their cry, half a shout, half the hoarse cough of a startled man, came from the hall below, followed by the crash of a door flung back and the scuffle of men on the stairs. Lestrade, who had remained to send off his messengers and return, burst into the room with a face flushed more by rage than by effort. Behind him a uniformed constable, held by the collar, a gentleman whose hat had gone to the winds and whose hair sat at a rakish angle, upon a brow rather too eager for my taste. "Caught. Him with a skeleton key in the study door," Lestrade panted. "Came like a ferret, quiet as sleep. Took one try at the lock and would have had it if Barker here hadn't sneezed. Basil Wigram, by all that's neat." Wigram shook himself free of the constable's grasp with a mixture of dignity and alarm. This is an outrage. Eleanor, cousin, send this lout away. I came to secure certain papers for your protection. For your protection, Holmes repeated evenly, and for the pulping of those not to your protection. Pray, Mr. Wigram, when did you last purchase silk by the coil in Cheapside? The nephew's eyes snapped to Holmes with a quick, intelligent flicker. I do not purchase haberdashery. No, said Holmes, but a partner's clerk does at your direction. A small question before Lestrade grows impatient. Did you recommend Mr. Aubrey Pelling to Mr. Charpentier? The sandalwood on your cuff tells me your circles overlap. Wigram drew himself up. For an instant the man's mask, amiable, bustling, the alert nephew, slipped, and I saw a leaner intelligence looking from behind it. He answered coolly, Pelling has done business in apportionment of shares for us. He is known. Known, murmured Holmes. As a case is known to a press, a letter to a mould. He turned slightly. Watson, would you oblige me with the telegram again? I placed it in his hand. He addressed Wigram with sudden briskness. You see this signature, Clegg? Note the C, how it opens like a fish's mouth. Here, he produced from his pocket that first receipt which Lestrade had fetched. Clegg's true hand. He closes his C like a pinched purse. Your forged summons kept its mouth open. We have no time for philology now. But Lestrade will have much for you. On what charge? Wigram flung back. Attempting to secure our firm's documents from prying. Your yard shall hear from Messrs. Prideaux and Lear before your boots are cold. On a charge, Lestrade said between his teeth, of unlawful entry and obstruction, until Mr. Holmes makes it murder. Murder is a large word, Holmes said almost lightly. I have not yet demanded it. But I shall ask this of you, Mr. Wigram. What say you to a brown leather case, old and salt, which has moved from a press where your boot left mica? What to a packet of banknotes, lifted and resealed with clove, hidden at Belter's yard among pulp, entered at 7 by a hand that mimics your clerk's, and another sold to a money-changer by your creature Reeves? What to a barber at the stairs who can supply whiskers and a scar, and a printer in Houndsditch that stamps telegrams whose form the bank never issued? Wigram's jaw set like a clamp. I say, he returned very steadily, that you are a man with a taste for romances. I came to protect my cousin. I shall not speak further without counsel. Holmes inclined his head. As you please. Inspector, if you are wise, you will let Mr. Wigram sit with his counsel in the front parlour for an hour under guard, and permit me the liberty of your 2 best men and a whistle. The second act is not here. His nostrils quivered almost imperceptibly. It is where Sandalwood and Bay have a common shelf. Lestrade eyed him, then jerked a nod. Barker, Mason, plant yourselves either side. No slips. He turned to Holmes. Where now? Houndsditch, said Holmes. Kay and Son. If our counterfeiters have boiled their sheets and trimmed their edges there as well as at Belter's, we shall find clove where gum should be and a little imprint, tiny letters blind as a mole upon a hoard of lies. We were in the hall when a boy in a cap, breathless with the zeal that only sixpence can hire, hammered at the door with a message. Lestrade tore it. His face altered. From the yard at Belter's, 4 packets, Mr. Holmes. Holmes's eyes lit with a dangerous satisfaction. Tidier than I hoped. The mind that hides 4 will count the 5th, and remember where he put it. Come, Watson. Every packet that lifts its head from pulp is a voice. We will go where voices are printed, and ask who taught them to speak with another man's tongue. He turned once to Miss Charpentier, and with a gentleness very rare in him said, Courage. We have the net drawn upon the hour that stole your father. The fish within it are beginning to feel the mesh. Houndsditch receives a stranger with the wary curiosity of a market that has learned to weigh a man as quickly as it weighs his purse. There are lanes there where the merchandise is as honest as pewter, and others where it is as adaptable as a conscience. Kay and Son occupied the middle ground, a narrow frontage, clean windows, a treadled press visible within, and a bell on the door that jangled with more energy than dignity when Holmes set it quivering. A youth with ink to his elbows and a smudge across his nose looked up from the forme he was locking. He made a brave attempt at a bow when Lestrade displayed his card. "Mr. Krantz is out on an errand," he said. "I'm Emile." Holmes's eyes swept the shop the way a draft sweeps filings into a pattern. Racks of type stood in neat regiments. A shelf housed gummed papers, ribbons, and a row of bottles in which various adhesives waited like patient sins. He stepped to the counter and lifted, with a finger as light as a heron's toe, the corner of a stack of blue slips. "Telegraph forms?" he inquired mildly. "Receipts," the boy returned. "Order dockets, labels, tickets. We print what a man needs if he pays. Nothing improper, sir." "And you stamp the paper with your blind here in the corner," Holmes observed, turning a slip to show the faint impressed K and Son that matched our telegram. "A thrifty habit. It saves argument when goods go astray." Emile's chest swelled a little. "Mr. Krantz says a mark is as good as a handshake." "Quite so," Holmes murmured, and drifted to the shelf of bottles. He uncorked one, then another, bringing them as close to his nostrils as one might dare in polite society. At the third he gave a soft, satisfied sigh. "Clove and gum," he said. "An accommodating marriage." Lestrade, who had placed himself squarely between the door and temptation, rapped the counter with a knuckle. "We want records of orders taken within the last week, for blue forms trimmed to the size of a telegraph slip, and any work requested in the hand of Clegg or the bank." Emile looked dismayed. "We keep a book," he admitted, and fetched it from beneath the counter. The entries, penciled in 2 hands, 1 neat, 1 slapdash, marched by day. Holmes ran his finger down them as a musician runs a scale. "There," he said at last, tapping. "Labels blue, cut narrow, customer P. And again, next line, ribbons gummed, customer P. No address." Emile swallowed. Sometimes a gentleman pays ready and prefers no advertising. Holmes's gaze, cool and impersonal as frost, lifted to the boy's worried face. "Describe this P." "A neat gentleman," Emile said. "Brown coat, a flower in his buttonhole." Spoke soft, like a man who does not argue because he expects the world to agree. "Smelt," he faltered, "like a church," Holmes suggested. "Sandal," Emile blurted, grateful. Holmes's mouth curved almost imperceptibly. 2 errands, then, within 2 days. "Did he collect himself?" "No, sir. Her porter took the parcel to Belter & Co.'s, the paper yard by the stairs." Holmes closed the book. "Your master is an honest craftsman, Emile. Let us save him the inconvenience of an evening call at the yard. When Mr. Krantz returns, you will tell him Inspector Lestrade purchased 1 bottle of clove gum, and that Dr. Watson paid 2 shillings for the information that your blind mark appears on a forged summons. This will sting his pride. Pride is disinfectant in a printer." He laid coins on the counter with the same care he reserved for placing a reagent in a flame, and we withdrew. Outside, Holmes's hand came down lightly on Lestrade's sleeve. "It is Pelling," he said so quietly that the name seemed more a diagnosis than an accusation. "He orders labels, gummed ribbons, and blue slips. He smells of sandal. He sends fabrications to a yard he already intends to use for burial. He is our artificer. Wigram is our arithmetic," Lestrade grunted. "Then I take Pelling at once." "You may try," Holmes replied, "but you will find him more slippered than booted. He has had a morning to smell danger. Better to see where he runs when the rat-hole smokes." His eyes narrowed. "I shall require a hat of a certain shape, a beard of an uncertain provenance, and the acquaintance of a barber who sells both. Watson, you will accompany Lestrade to Belter's, and watch for a gentleman who scolds with a quiet voice. I shall be elsewhere everywhere until twilight." He vanished, as is his trick when he smells the need to dissolve into London's tide. I confess that even now, with years of his ways behind me, his sudden effacement sent a little shiver along my spine, as if the air had grown thinner. Lestrade and I returned to the river. The yard had already yielded the 4 packets, and an excited drayman had discovered a 5th half caught in the bale's wire. Holmes's prediction paid, with a bonus. The foreman, who had begun the day sullen, now wore the anxious obsequiousness of a man trying to rearrange his past to match the future's demands. Lestrade took possession of the fines and posted men at the gates and along the alley. We waited. The river made its indifferent noises, lapping and slapping with the patience of a creditor. A barge nosed past. A hawker's cry fluted thinly from the lane. It was near 4 when a cab drew up not in front of the yard, but 2 doors short of it. A gentleman descended with an umbrella and a flower in his lapel. His face was smooth-shaven, his hair too carefully arranged for the day's damp, and his manner the kind that makes clerks move aside without ever being asked. He walked like a man who anticipates doors opening. Pelling, Lestrade breathed. We let him pass into Belter's before we followed, and when we turned the corner of the Bale Canyon, we nearly collided with Holmes, yet not Holmes. A dockman's cap pulled low, a beard like old rope, and a patch across one eyebrow that altered the plane of his face. His eyes, however, were the same quick steel. He did not look at us. He was already looking through us, past us to where Pelling stood with the foreman, gesturing with a moderate hand. We were near enough to hear. Most irregular, Pelling was saying. My firm delivered private waste here at 7. It is to be pulped without inspection. I cannot have my clients' names bandied about on the wharf. You will take orders from me or from Mr. Wigram as before. The foreman licked his lips. Inspectors posted men, Mr. Pelling. There's nothing moving unless the yard says it moves. Then the yard will be instructed, Pelling returned, and produced a card with a delicate impatience. I shall telephone the bank. Meanwhile, fetch the ledger. Holmes's shoulder brushed mine. His beard smelt faintly of spirit gum. He has come to retrieve the entries, he murmured, so low the words were almost vibration. The mouse dislikes a breadcrumb trail. Lestrade stepped forward. No need to trouble the bank, Mr. Pelling. You will come with me to Scotland Yard. Pelling turned with admirable composure. His eye took in Lestrade's warrant card, flicked to me and slid past the dockman with the ropey beard, as if to say that such fellows do not lose money because they have none to lose. On what pretext? He asked, his voice weary rather than afraid. Forgery for a start, Lestrade snapped, and conspiracy to defraud. Later, perhaps murder. Pelling's brows lifted a degree. You have permitted imagination to stroll ahead of jurisdiction, Inspector. I advise it to return. I have clients. Holmes's hand was already at his sleeve, not in arrest, but with a curious delicacy, as if verifying a texture. Sandal, he said conversationally. Anne Bay. Poor harmony. May I add a third note? With the speed of a conjurer, he lifted Pelling's wrist, turned the cuff back, and revealed a faint crescent of darker skin, as if something had been repeatedly leaned there. A little bruise of habit. The handle of a gumming roller, Holmes announced, straightening. It sits just so at the wrist. You have been industrious, Mr. Pelling. For the first time a crack opened in the man's poise. Colour rose and retreated. He inclined his head a fraction. I am industrious, he said. That is all. Industrious enough to visit Kay & Son twice and Belter's thrice, Holmes went on, his tone becoming almost lazy. Industrious enough to order blue slips and gummed ribbons, to stamp them with a blind not your own, to send a forged summons to a man who trusted his watch, and to dress a counterfeit with whiskers and a waxen scar. Industrious enough to know that paper forgets if boiled. Pelling's eyes had shifted from Lestrade to Holmes. You name romances, sir, he said, and I am to be the villain. I should prefer melodrama. It is shorter. Holmes's hand, still the dockman's hand to casual sight, closed, with a pressure that was not brutal but was inexorable, on Pelling's umbrella. He turned it in the man's grasp so that the ferrule showed. Its tip was not the usual metal cap, but a padded oval of dark leather. Watson, he said in that same offhand tone. Our bruise at last. Note the rim, how it would lay an oval mark if it struck not with a lunge but a push. A gentleman who believes in efficiency keeps his instrument to hand. Lestrade's face hardened. Barker Mason, he called, and the two men he had posted came in like dogs slipped from a leash. "Gently," Holmes warned. "A fox will double if pressed too fast." The fox proved as good as his reputation. Pelling did not struggle. He merely said, "If you insist," and allowed the risks to be taken. Even then his mind ran its arithmetic. You could see it in the distant glitter of his eye. He glanced once beyond us, not to the yard gates but to the narrow side arch where a handcart might pass. Holmes's gaze followed it in the same instant. "Deeks," he said very softly, "I confess my heart leapt." The valet stood in the shadow of the arch, as composed as on any morning with a cravat to brush. His eyes, however, were on Pelling, not us, and for the first time I read in them an uncertainty that looked very much like fear. "Mr. Pelling," he said, with the quiet of a man who has served orders and is unused to giving them, "Mr. Wigram desires—" "That you keep your place," Pelling snapped, all silk gone from his tone. "Wait!" Deeks's eyes shifted, not to Pelling now, but to Holmes's ropey beard, and in that instant I knew he knew. A muscle in his cheek jumped. Something like resolution gathered in him. Holmes took the smallest breath. "Inspector," he said, "let Mr. Pelling look at the ledger. He wishes it. Give him rope." Lestrade stared, swore under his breath, then jerked a nod to the foreman who, sweating, brought the great book. Pelling bent his head. His shoulders uncoiled a fraction. His hand moved to the page. It was the hand of a man who has decided upon one last enterprise. Holmes's whistle trilled once, sharp as a glass nicking. Barker and Mason tightened. Pelling's fingers darted, not for the ledger but for his umbrella, bringing it up in a quick short arc toward Lestrade's temple. It was the shortest of blows, the kind a man trains his hand to when he wishes to fell without fracture. But the umbrella did not land. Deeks moved lightly, unexpectedly, and caught the shaft halfway. The padded oval glanced my sleeve and struck the ledger's spine with a thud. In the same breath Barker had Pelling by the throat and Mason by the wrist. The umbrella clattered. The yard echoed. Deeks stood very straight. "I took orders," he said, not to Pelling now but to Holmes, "until they told me to strike where a gentleman dies by inches. I have been a soldier. I will not be a murderer." Holmes's beard hid his mouth, but I heard the relief in his exhalation. "Better late than never," he said. "Inspector, you have your man, and perhaps a witness more valuable than a packet saved from pulp. Mr. Deeks, you will walk with Dr. Watson, and tell him everything you were told to do from the hour of 5 yesterday till now. Leave nothing, not the shape of a knot or the smell of an oil." Pelling, between Barker and Mason, had recovered enough to sneer. "He will tell you stories to save his hide. Your case will drown in words as readily as my notes in vats." "On the contrary," Holmes replied, eyes bright, "words float when they are cut to the right length. We shall see presently whether yours or Mr. Deeks's ride higher upon the water." He turned to Lestrade. "You will take Pelling to the yard, search his rooms for whiskers, wax, and blue labels, and send a man to Kay & Son for their master. I shall bring you Wigram before nightfall. He will come without a hand laid upon him. He will think he goes to protect his cousin. He will go to protect himself from arithmetic. Men who believe in sums always try one more." The carriage jolted through the deepening dusk as Holmes at last stripped away the false beard and cap, tucking them into the bag at his side. His face, free of disguise, had that peculiar brightness which to me always signaled that he stood upon the brink of the whole truth. The faint spirit gum still clung at the edges of his brow, but his mind was far from such trifles. "Watson," he said, leaning back, "the drama is narrowing to its final circle. We have 3 actors who matter. Wigram, the partner who counts sums; Pelling, the artificer who bends paper and time to his needs; and Deeks, the servant who obeys orders until his conscience gags. Each plays a part, but not all play equally." "And Wigram?" I asked. "Surely his presence with the skeleton key condemns him." Holmes's fingers steepled. "It condemns him of intent, but not yet of action. He would destroy records that speak to his profit. But destruction is not blood." Pelling, however, carried the padded umbrella, and upon Charpentier's temple we have the echo of its rim. It is Pelling's hand that pushed. It is Wigram's hand that balanced the books around it. The conspiracy is double-stranded. One weaves the lie, the other caches it. I could not repress a shudder. And the servant? He is the thread that bound the bolt, Holmes replied. Without Deeks, the conjuring trick of time could not succeed. Yet note how quickly his loyalty swerved when murder came into play. A soldier may smuggle, but he will not slay his master. His testimony will serve. We drew up at Baker Street, where Lestrade awaited us with the suppressed excitement of a terrier who has the rat in the corner, but will not rush without his master's whistle. He reported that Pelling lay under lock at the yard, protesting with weary sarcasm, that Wigram had paced like a caged cat, demanding counsel and muttering of family honour, and that the packets from Belters had been secured, 5 in number, each tampered with in the same manner. Holmes nodded once. Excellent. The net is tied. Tomorrow we shall stage the final act. But tonight we prepare the stage. He rose and paced the room, lighting a cigarette and leaving it untouched upon the mantel. We must bring both Wigram and Pelling face to face, with Deeks as the hinge upon which the door swings. Only then will the entire mechanism reveal itself. He bade me fetch the notes from our case at Belters, and examined each under his lens. The initialed strips, though counterfeit, bore tiny imperfections, an extra curl upon the letter, a flaw in the paper where the clove gum had stretched it. All from the same press, he murmured, and handled by the same careless thumb, the thumb of Aubrey Pelling. But to convince the court we must demonstrate more than handwriting and gum. We must show the line from telegram to counterfeit to corpse. And that line, his eyes gleamed, runs through the hour of 5. He set the packets aside and turned his attention once more to the brown gloves of Deeks, still in our possession. He held them to the light, pointing out the dull burnish upon thumb and forefinger. Here lies the mimicry. The man in the hansom rubbed polished leather, not skin. Jarvis swore to the gesture, but leather betrays. We will show him both glove and habit. He will not doubt again that he carried a counterfeit. Lestrade rubbed his hands. So tomorrow you spring the trap. Tomorrow, Holmes replied, we allow them to spring it upon themselves. You will arrange that Wigram and Pelling are both conveyed to Charpentier's study. Deeks shall be present. The clock remains where it was. When each man is confronted with the other, and with the instruments of his trade, we shall see who speaks first. Risky, Lestrade muttered. Necessary, Holmes countered. For criminals who trust one another's silence must be made to hear it break. He sank into his chair, fingertips pressed together. Watson, you will keep your notes clear. Posterity should read not only of the trap, but of the way the lie of time was laid. The next morning found us once again in Marylebone. The house had acquired that curious hush, which settles when scandal has passed the threshold, but not yet left with the constable. Miss Charpentier remained upstairs. Mrs. Darnell hovered between devotion and dread. The study was prepared. The clock, shattered face still fixed at 5:17. The rug with its telltale soot. The desk upon which the false telegram rested beside the genuine receipts. Lestrade entered with his prisoners, Pelling, pale but composed, and Wigram, flushed and anxious. They were seated apart. Deeks stood stiffly by the window, his hands clasped behind him like a soldier at parade. Holmes addressed them without flourish. Gentlemen, the hour is set as once it was set upon this clock. Between 5 and 6 yesterday morning, Ernest Charpentier lived, signed, and died. You would have us believe that time permits such contradictions. But time does not lie unaided. Men lie. One wields the pen, another the umbrella, and a third the key. Each thought himself safe in the other's silence. But silence is the most fragile bond of all. Wigram's jaw worked. This is absurd theatre. Then play your part, Holmes replied smoothly, for I have the props. He laid the gloves upon the table. Jarvis the cabman will swear to the polish these acquired, as they aped Charpentier's gesture. The scar, he produced the wax mould, was pressed from this. The telegram. He touched the false slip. Printed at Kay & Son and stamped with their blind. The packets, he gestured to the sealed bundles, lifted, opened, resealed with clove gum and buried in Belter's yard. And the blow, he raised the umbrella, padded tip gleaming, delivered here. He indicated the oval bruise upon the dead man's temple in Watson's careful sketch. For a moment there was silence, broken only by the tick of a neighbour's clock far down the street. Then Pelling laughed, short, contemptuous. A neat romance, Mr. Holmes, but without proof of who struck. Proof? Holmes interrupted. We have more than proof. We have a witness. His gaze turned to Deeks. You will speak now. The valet's face was ashen, but his voice was steady. I was ordered to bolt the door from outside, sir, with thread and bone. I oiled the key and pulled it shut after Mr. Charpentier was struck. I did not see the blow, but I heard it. Mr. Pelling told me it would be no more than a fall. I believed him till I saw the bruise. After that I obeyed because I feared. Wigram sprang up, fury breaking through his polish. You coward! You swore— I swore to serve my master, Deeks said simply. Not to kill him. Pelling's mask cracked at last. He turned upon Wigram with cold disdain. You brought in the servant, then lost him. Arithmetic, my dear Basil, is nothing without discretion. You should have let me handle all. Holmes's voice cut through their rising quarrel. Gentlemen, you forget yourselves. The clock is ticking once more, but not to your convenience. It ticks for the gallows. Lestrade stepped forward, his men at his back. You've heard it yourselves. Conspiracy, fraud and murder. Basil, Wigram, Aubrey, Pelling. You'll answer for Ernest Charpentier before the Crown. Wigram sagged into his chair, colour drained. Pelling merely straightened his cuffs as if the yard were an annoyance, not doom. Time will judge, he said with a faint smile. And time, Mr. Holmes, is not always your servant. Holmes regarded him with something between pity and disdain. No, but it is always my witness. It is one of the oddities of the yard that, though it is the anvil upon which London's frauds are beaten flat, the place smells chiefly of damp stone and ink. We were shown to a narrow room, whose single window admitted a paste of grey light, and there Lestrade contrived what Holmes had demanded. 2 chairs for Pelling and Wigram, set at angles that denied them easy commerce, with Deeks, grave as a sergeant on parade, a pace behind and to the side. I took a corner with my notebook. Holmes remained standing, his back to the window so that his face was in shadow and theirs were plainly red. Inspector, he said with that crisp good humour which so infuriates a guilty man, permit me a little theatre. It will save the court's time. He laid upon the table, one after another, the principal properties of our case, the waxen scar, the false telegram bearing Kay & Son's blind, the tan gloves with their telltale polish, a strip of gummed ribbon steeped in clove, the pearl pin with its mirror flaw, and at the last, the umbrella with the padded oval ferrule. Pelling's eyes measured each coolly. Wigram's flickered like a man watching the bead over a surgeon's door. The story that these objects tell could be recited by a child, Holmes continued. But to spare the child I shall ask our witnesses to supply their lines. He rang. Jarvis of Poplar shuffled in, hat in hand, and prompted gently, named the hour, the habit of the rubbed fingers, and, when shown the glove, the dull gloss at thumb and forefinger that had offended his cabman's tidy eye. He pointed to the wax scar with a rough oath of recognition. Mr. Clegg followed, pale with a banker's distaste for publicity, yet unimpeachable as he identified the rehearsal in the blotter and the inadvertent fibre caught in a nib the morning the receipt was signed. Emil of Houndsditch came last, miserable but truthful, and placed a neat, sandal-scented gentleman at his counter, twice in 2 days for blue slips and gummed ribbons. Holmes thanked each as he would a musician brought in for a bar of song, and when the last had gone, he set his knuckles lightly upon the umbrella's ferrule. A machine has many parts, he said. To know the maker, we ask which part carries the mark of mind. Mr. Wigram has arithmetic, Mr. Pelling artifice, The mind that arranged the lie about time is a craftsman's. To lock the door from without by bone and silk, to fix a clock's hand at 5:17 with a jab at the arbor, to press wax upon a living cheek, and so teach a scar to sit for the cabman, to write a bank summons upon Houndsditch paper, and stamp it with K and Son. All this is the hand that sands a seam with cloven smiles when the paste lies flat. Mr. Pelling, the bruise on Mr. Charpentier's temple, matches this oval like a seal to its die. You will find, Lestrade, upon the ferrule, a trace of graphite and tallow akin to that upon the study key. Pelling's lip curved. And if you find nothing? We shall find memory, Holmes returned evenly. Mr. Deeks remembers the click of the bolt and the smell of clove. Memory is a better reagent than most acids. Wigram, who had struggled to preserve a banker's indifference, burst out, "You make a mask of it. You speak of machines and paste and ribbons. What of the cause? Why should any sane man contrive such nonsense?" Holmes turned his head slightly. "Because a sane man with a hole in his books will do any nonsense to keep the column from spilling out of the page. Your Cape venture, Mr. Wigram, failed more completely than you confided to your uncle. You advanced against Adelaide remittances that had not arrived, and pledged Charpentier and Wigram at a rate that would ruin you if the call were not met by noon of yesterday. Pelling, who likes his profit printed neat as a billhead, offered a solution. He would raise the money by borrowing your master's name and body for an hour. He would disguise a man to play Charpentier at the bank. He would send a forged summons. He would take the notes, ride home to ring so that the cabman could swear, and meanwhile have you see to the clock and the bolt by the hand of a servant who thought himself loyal. Then the packets would be buried in pulp. Your hole would be plugged by private waste, and your books would recover their figure." Wigram stared as if a blunt instrument had struck his forehead. "Recover? And if my uncle lived to read the ledger?" Holmes's voice grew, if anything, the softer. "He did live to read. He confronted one of you at 6:05, in his study. He was not a violent man, but his fencing hand was not uneducated." He reached for the umbrella. "Do not move, Mr. Pelling. A gentleman keeps one near the door." But the one who feared arithmetic more than honor struck first, not with a blow to shatter bone, but with a shove, an oval imprint through cloth, just sufficient to drop a heart poised on anxiety. It was neat. You counted on neatness to carry you through. But neatness leaves a seam. Pelling laughed quietly. The sound had a frankness that chilled me more than any bluster. "You are better at music than at morals, Mr. Holmes. You play variations on inevitability. Suppose, for a pretty exercise, that your arithmetic is wrong. Suppose Wigram had no hole. Suppose I alone desired the money. Where is your motive, then?" "In your wrist," Holmes said, and before any of us could frame his question, he had stepped forward, caught Pelling's sleeve, and turned it back, as he had done at the yard. The faint shadow at the inner wrist was clearer by daylight, a bruise not born of one day's labor. "You have rolled gum for weeks, not to sell to others only, to practice a seam that would not lift under a banker's finger. That is not the diligence of a man who robs once and runs. That is preparation for a tide of paper, telegrams, labels, receipts, enough to bleach an acre. You intended a campaign, not a raid. You needed a partner inside a firm, one who could give you a ledger to balance your fraud. You chose Mr. Wigram." Wigram's hands, which had gripped the chair, loosened and then clenched again with a very different purpose. He darted a look at Deeks, a quick, despairing little glance that begged for complicity, and finding none, he broke. Words poured out of him in a parched rush. It was for a week, no more. Pelling swore the Adelaide money would be paid by Saturday. We were to borrow the name and mend the books when the remittance came. I never wished, God knows I never wished the blow. Pelling's composure did not ripple. "Basil," he said almost kindly, "never speak to a tune someone else whistles." Lestrade struck the table. "That will do. We have it." Holmes lifted a finger. "A moment. Last chord. Mr. Wigram, how did you open the study door when you returned from Threadneedle Street?" Wigram's eyes had sunk. His voice was sullen. with a skeleton key. I told your men as much. I came for papers, to protect Eleanor. You came, Holmes rejoined, to tear out the leaf that spoke of 7 o'clock and private waste. You found the constable at the door instead. Had you succeeded, we should still have had the dust in the press where the Brown case stood, and the mica upon your boot from Belter's Yard where you never go. You will not be the first banker in the dock to be betrayed by cleanliness. Pelling's gaze, which had thus far travelled only to amuse itself, at last rested fully on Holmes. You have stitched a very tight garment, he said. It fits almost. Only one button shows your tailor's haste. Holmes's eyebrows rose. You ascribe the blow to me, Pelling continued, because I keep a neat umbrella. But if I had wished murder, a knife is quicker and leaves fewer. Ovals, is that not so, Doctor? It is quicker, I said, chilled despite myself, and more difficult to explain to a respectable jury. He inclined his head. Just so. Holmes's answer was the little smile that never reaches his eyes. You err, Mr. Pelling, in supposing juries think in lines straighter than your own. They reason by habits. A gentleman's umbrella is an instrument. A knife is a story. You prefer instruments. And even if I were wrong in that single button, your coat is still of the hangman's cloth, Lestrade signalled. The constables moved. Wigram sagged, surrendered. Pelling rose with feline lightness, and held out his wrists as if offering an experiment to science. Time will judge, he said again, and for the first time I heard something in him that I had not before. Perhaps not fear, but an acceptance of the logic that had outpaced him. When they were gone, Deeks remained, standing very straight. Holmes regarded him for a long moment. You have been late, he said at last, but you have been brave. There is a difference between a soldier's obedience and a thief's. See that you never confuse them again. If Miss Eleanor will have me, the man answered hoarsely, I will spend the rest of my days letting doors open only from within. Holmes inclined his head a fraction. We shall see what the magistrate says of your silk and oil. I shall say what I can of your umbrella. He turned then to Lestrade. Have your men fetch Krantz of Houndsditch, and keep Clegg ready with his ledger. We complete the chain tonight. The printer to the ribbons to the telegram to the bank to the umbrella, and the umbrella to the clock. When a chain has no weak link, a judge will hang his judgment upon it. Lestrade, in unwonted good spirits, clapped his hat on at an angle and went out with long strides. I gathered my notes with a sigh that was not wholly of fatigue. Holmes had sunk into a chair and was staring at the umbrella as if it were a line of music not yet fully resolved. You have it, then, I said softly. I have the truth, he returned. Whether it will wrap Miss Charpentier warmly is another matter. Truth is not always a shawl. Sometimes it is a draught. He looked up, and the steel in him softened. We shall give her what comfort we can. Come, Watson. A pipe, a sandwich, and then the last movement. The following morning Baker Street seemed unusually bright, the fog lifting in lazy folds, as though London itself had exhaled in relief. Holmes sat in his chair, pipe in hand, examining the final ledger entries with the precision of a surgeon inspecting a delicate specimen. I, as ever, watched with a mixture of admiration and awe, attempting to follow the rapid currents of his thought, which seemed to leap from one detail to the next with a velocity beyond ordinary comprehension. Watson, he began, his voice calm but sharp, let us recount the chain that has carried us from perplexity to clarity. We began with a death seemingly impossible to reconcile with the movements of a man at the bank. A clock struck a lie, a signature imitated with painstaking fidelity, and a servant enlisted unwittingly in a scheme beyond his comprehension. Yet each element, though designed to deceive, left behind traces, the polish upon a glove, the scent of spices, mica dust, the faintest abrasions upon a key. Observation, patience, and reason alone could disentangle these threads. I nodded. It was astonishing how each piece, insignificant in isolation, became vital in context. The veil of impossibility lifted with every discovery. Holmes allowed a small smile. Precisely, Watson. Let me summarize so that no subtlety is lost. The forged telegram directed Charpentier to the bank before the hour was properly due, the purpose being to remove 30,000 sovereigns without arousing suspicion. Pelling, the architect of the scheme, disguised a man to impersonate Charpentier at the bank, ensuring the documents and signatures appeared genuine. Wagram, motivated by arithmetic and opportunity, manipulated internal records to make the transactions appear routine. Deeks, obedient yet conscientious, performed the minor acts that made the deception possible, oiling the key, bolting the door, and maintaining appearances. He paused, letting each name and action hang in the air. Yet it was in the small details, the habits, the polish, the scent, that we discovered the truth. Jarvis observed the cabman's mimicry. The blotter revealed rehearsed signatures. Belter's yard concealed the packets, and the clock's broken face was a witness in itself. Each clue, though subtle, formed part of a cohesive pattern. The criminals relied upon human inattention. They failed to consider the consistency of nature and habit. Even the wax scar, I added, revealed the imitation. Such precision, yet still imperfect. Holmes inclined his head. Indeed, the wax told us who could imitate, but not who could act with exacting care. Pelling's hand was evident in the oval of the bruise. Wigram's fingerprints were in the ledger's balancing. The servant's loyalty was confirmed in his hesitation when confronted with the consequences. Each participant's character revealed itself through action or inaction. We were silent for a moment, each reflecting on the intricacy of the deception. Then Holmes turned to me, eyes bright with that familiar gleam. Watson, observe the lesson here. When one constructs a lie so intricate that it seems impossible, it is invariably human error, the misstep of a thumb, a trace of powder, a slight misalignment. That becomes the agent of truth. Even genius cannot escape the laws of consistency. Lestrade entered, escorting the last of the papers and records from the yard. Everything accounted for, Mr. Holmes. The culprits are in custody, the money recovered, and the ledger reconciled. The bank is satisfied, and Miss Charpentier can breathe without fear. Holmes allowed himself a rare nod of satisfaction. Then the matter is concluded. The criminal designs have unraveled. The innocent have been vindicated. And as for time, he added, casting a glance toward the broken clock, it has merely observed the folly of those who presume to manipulate it. Even in deception, nature and habit leave their mark. I could not resist one last question. And your role, Holmes? The deductions, the anticipation. Surely the conclusion is as much yours as anyone's. He smiled faintly, the shadow of modesty crossing his otherwise imperious demeanor. The role of the detective, Watson, is to illuminate the path, not to claim the act itself. I merely read the patterns, follow the logic, and bring consistency to what appears chaotic. The world rewards skill, not arrogance, and it is the latter that trips most would-be criminals. Deeks, now free from the tension of the previous day, approached quietly. Mr. Holmes, he said with simple dignity, I owe you thanks for protecting a servant from blame for acts he did not intend to harm. Holmes inclined his head. So you performed your duty, Deeks, as any honorable man would. Loyalty without malice is always rewarded by justice, though not always by fortune. Take pride, for you have served rightly. Miss Charpentier appeared, her countenance serene but tinged with lingering anxiety. I cannot thank you enough, Mr. Holmes. You have preserved my father's legacy, and unmasked those who would have destroyed it. Holmes waved a hand, dismissing her praise with characteristic modesty. I am merely a student of human nature, Miss Charpentier. It is the evidence that speaks, and the careful observer who listens. My satisfaction lies in clarity, not accolades. I could see, as we gathered our notes and prepared to leave, that Holmes's mind was already turning to the next case, the next problem that would demand the same discipline and intellect. The city beyond the windows was alive with fog and gaslight, its mysteries innumerable, and he regarded it with the calm expectation of one who knows that truth is always discoverable, provided one has the patience to follow it. As we departed Baker Street that evening, I reflected upon the extraordinary series of events: a clock that lied, a servant coerced, two men whose greed and calculation nearly outwitted the law, and yet in the end it was observation, logic, and the relentless application of reason that prevailed. Holmes, ever vigilant, had demonstrated once more that no detail is too small to escape the notice of the mind trained to see it. We walked along the foggy street in companionable silence, each absorbed in thought, until Holmes, with a faint twinkle in his eye, broke it. "Watson," he said, "let us hope our next adventure is less turbulent." I smiled, knowing full well that wherever London's mysteries awaited, Sherlock Holmes would meet them with the same meticulous reasoning, unerring insight, and inexhaustible patience that had brought this intricate case to its satisfying conclusion. The case of the crime that defied time was closed, not with chaos, but with logic, observation, and the quiet triumph of human reason over deception.